Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So, good morning everyone. Thanks very much for inviting me here today. My name's Georgina Brown and I'm going to be talking to you about the medical research that we've been doing with SenseCam at our Cambridge lab in the UK. So, over the next half an hour I'm going to present to you a single case study in which a lady with marked amnesia showed remarkable improvement to her memory after systematically reviewing SenseCam images. Before I do that, I'd first like to set the context a little bit and tell you what we mean about the causes and treatments of memory impairments, and also tell you a little bit about memory loss itself and what memory means to us. And I hope that by doing this, I'll help you guys to understand why we as clinicians are really very excited about the prospects of SenseCam as a superior tool for the treatment and rehabilitation of memory. So, where does this quit? Okay, there we go. So just to give you a bit of information about my background, I'm a neuropsychologist, which essentially means that I'm interested in the assessment and treatment of cognitive impairments. I work at Cambridge University's teaching hospital in the UK, where there are many expert clinicians in the field, and where we run what is regarded as Britain's leading memory clinic. In the clinic, we typically receive referrals from other consultants within the hospitals who may be unsure as to what particular diagnosis to give, and we therefore work alongside neurologists and psychiatrists to carry out a more detailed assessment with a view to determining appropriate treatment. So what do we mean by, this doesn't seem to be working very well. Is there another way of doing this other than clicking it? Not particularly well. Okay. So what do we mean by the causes and what are the causes and treatments of memory impairment? Well, broadly speaking, clinicians tend to divide the causes of memory impairment into two main camps. The first is neurodegenerative disease, which refers to the rapid and progressive cell death in the brain, usually associated with old age. And I'm sure that you're all familiar with Alzheimer's disease, which represents the most prevalent of these dementias. So other examples include vascular dementia and dementia with Lewy bodies, just to name a couple. The other main cause of memory impairment is through acquired brain injury. Now, this may occur through either trauma to the brain, such as a blow to the head, or through infectious diseases, or through a number of non-traumatic medical conditions, such as epilepsy, stroke, lack of oxygen to the brain, and so on. And so, how do we treat these memory problems? Well, the short and most honest answer to that is that despite our very best efforts, we don't treat them. In the UK, if you have Alzheimer's disease or if you have dementia with Lewy bodies, then we may be able to prescribe medication. And some patients do tell us that this does relieve their memory symptoms somewhat. However, there is very little evidence for the effectiveness of this medication, and certainly in the later stages of the diseases. For all other neurodegenerative diseases, there are no medical treatments available, and your best option for treatment is to have a package of external memory aids devised by a psychologist. So external memory aids refer to those objects and systems that we may use to help us remind us of things we want to remember. And these may include, for example, whiteboards, calendars, post-it notes, electronic organisers, and so on. However, I write in theory here because certainly in the UK there is a massive issue with lack of resources. To put together a suitable package of external memory aids requires an intensive neuropsychological assessment, interview and careful planning of rehabilitative strategies. There is only one memory aids clinic in the country, and I work there as part of my job at Addenbrooke's. But unlike all other healthcare in the UK, this is not funded by the government. So for memory loss due to acquired brain injury, the same situation occurs. So there is no medical treatment available, and your best hope is to use external memory aids. But of course, the same issue with resources exists. And there is a second, potentially more serious issue concerning the lack of resources, and I'll come on to that in just a moment. So what do we mean by memory loss? Well, I'm just going to talk to you about memory very, very briefly for a moment or two. So there are many, many different types of memory, but the one that tends to be most affected by neurological damage is what we call explicit memory, and that is memories that we are consciously aware of. This can be further divided into three main categories. So episodic memory refers to those recollections that we personally experienced events, and this may include time, place, associated emotions, which also affects the quality of the consolidation. So I just want you all to spend a moment here thinking about a really important event in your life, whether that was your wedding day, the birth of a child, a really important meeting or interview, whatever that was. I just want you to spend a couple of moments just thinking about that, reliving that experience. Now, what happens when you have that recollection? For most of you, you'll have had a very vivid and visual experience just then, with many details coming flooding back as you cued the recollection. And this is what we mean by episodic memory. It is also termed autobiographical memory, and the story obviously gets much more complicated, but for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to continue using the term episodic. So episodic memory contrasts with our semantic memory, which relates to our knowledge of facts and concepts. So when we use language, when we know what kind of a thing a dog is, when we teach our children that Paris is the capital of France, we're drawing upon our semantic memory. Prospective memory is our memory for things that we intend to do in the future, so information that we are holding online with the intention of acting upon at some later stage, whether this is remembering shopping that we need to get, people that we want to visit, appointments we want to keep, children to pick up. This is all drawing upon our prospective memory. So I mentioned that there was a potentially more serious problem with the lack of resources of memory aids, and that is, to our immense surprise, almost all memory aids are aimed at treating prospective memory. And this is really quite a serious issue when you think that episodic memory decline represents the hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. So maybe we should ask why we should want to help people remember their past. Well, actually, our episodic memory is critical to our quality of life. If we can't remember what happens to us, we can't lay down new memories, we can't learn new information or build new semantic memories. Our episodic memory also helps us guide our behaviours. On the basis of what we know about what we've done in the past, we make plans for the future. And just imagine what losing your episodic memory would do for your relationships. If for every time you experienced an event with somebody that you cared about, you were never able to talk about that event with them again. So episodic memory is really critical to the forming and sustaining of relationships, and its decline results in devastating social isolation. Many of our patients with memory impairments are all too aware of their problems, and this results in a number of secondary problems, much embarrassment and anxiety in social situations, and they therefore experience a decrease in their self-esteem, but also in their self-concept, since our self-identity is maintained in part by remembering that we behave consistently from one event to the next. So we wanted to find out whether using SenseCam to record experience could help with these kind of memory problems. And we thought that the device was ideal for this purpose for a number of reasons. And the first was that we thought that the kinds of images that SenseCam was taking would be very similar to the kinds of images in our episodic memory. And I'll develop this hypothesis a little bit more later on. But essentially, the images are obviously very visual in nature, as is our memory. And they are from our point of view, so egocentrically, out onto the world. They are formed with very little intervention on behalf of, the images are obviously taken without much intervention on behalf of the user. And for patients, we thought that the device and the software that we've been using were sufficiently easy to use and easy to view, requiring just a few minutes to review an event. So we thought that all of these properties of SenseCam may help queue and therefore help consolidation of memories that are otherwise locked away for these patients. So we investigated formally the utility of SenseCam as a memory aid in a 63-year-old, well-educated woman who I'm going to refer to as Mrs. B. Now, she attended our memory clinic in Cambridge and was diagnosed with limbic encephalitis a number of years ago now. So encephalitis is a viral infection of the brain which caused inflammation and damage to cell structures deep within her brain that were thought critical to memory functioning. So if you look at her brain scan here, you see there are two white circles either side of the midline there, and they represent atrophy or cell death in her hippocampus, which is the critical structure for memory functioning. And the result for Mrs. B is that she now has a very marked amnesia. So just a few days after an event, she typically has no recollection of that event having occurred. And a pertinent example of this is when she actually came to visit us in Cambridge. So she made the trip with her husband. It was quite a lengthy trip for them. They'd never been to Cambridge before. They stayed in a nice hotel. She had quite an upsetting incident while she was here. And just a few days after returning home, she would say that she'd never been to Cambridge. So she really does represent somebody with really quite a severe amnesia. So it's important to remember, obviously, that we're clinicians as well as researchers, and we always work collaboratively with our patients, and our plans and our use of SenseCam is therefore very much clinically motivated at the moment. And we therefore asked Mr. and Mrs. B what they wanted to achieve from a successful memory rehabilitation tool. And they had basically three main goals, and they were to improve her memory functioning generally, to be able to share and experience events with each other again, and to improve her self-esteem. So we compared using SenseCam versus a written diary versus no memory aid at all to help Mrs. B record special days. And we asked her to record these non-routine or interesting events for a particular reason, and that is for you or I, for us with intact memories, our brains usually do a fairly good job of sifting out and not paying too much attention to those boring or mundane events and holding on to the events that are important in our lives. So we wanted to be asking the right kinds of questions of SenseCam. Can it help us recall and consolidate those kinds of memories that our brain would ordinarily do a good job of consolidating as a matter of course? So Mrs. B's husband was asked to take notes every time that they went out on a significant event, and these were used to gauge her recall subsequently. So her recall was tested the day following an event, and this was used as a gauge for all subsequent recall tests, which were taken every 2 days for 2 weeks. We set up the protocol such that following each time that she was tested, she then had an immediate viewing of the SenseCam images. So a typical format for an event and testing would run event, following day her recall would be tested, immediately followed by reviewing the movie, wait 2 days, test recall, review stimulus, wait 2 days, and so on. During the control condition, we simply substituted a written diary for viewing the SenseCam images. So we followed the exact same protocol as I've just described, and they simply looked and read through the written notes together rather than reviewing the images. And in the baseline condition, we tested her recall in exactly the same way, but there was no mechanism by which she could review or rehearse the information from those events. So after the 2-week period was up, we wanted also to evaluate her retention of these events in the long term, and we therefore tested her recall after an interval of 1 month, having no review of the movie itself, and then with a 2-month and 3-month interval similarly. And what did we find? Okay, I think this might need new batteries. Okay. So this graph represents our results, will represent our results. And you see that along the bottom here we have the number of days following the event. And along the y-axis here, we have her proportion of recall. And I've called it proportion of recall because, as I've said, we've looked at these results in relation to how much she recalled on that first day following the event. So they're prorated such that each recall is always determined to be 1 on day 1, and obviously decline following that represents a decline relative to the information she recalled on day 1, and an increase, she's recalling more. So we can see with the baseline condition here that 3 days after the event, she is recalling pretty much 3/4 of the information that she recalled just 1 day following the event. But by day 5, she has absolutely no recollection of the event, and that was the case for the remainder of the 2 weeks. Using the written diary helped for her, so we can see here that there's a slight drop in the amount of information that she recalled over the 2-week period, but this stays fairly stable at somewhere between 60 and 90% for all of the time that she's actually reviewing the written diary. And so what happened when we gave her the SenseCam as a means of recording the events? Well, what we see here are fairly staggering results for us, and these represent an improvement in her memory for each subsequent time that she reviews the material. So we were simply quite blown away by these results, and they were obviously delighted about the amount of information that she was able to retain and therefore discuss with her husband. Looking at her retention in the longer term, we found that actually, yes, she has consolidated this information. So after a month without reviewing the images at all, her recall is still extraordinarily high, and similarly for a 2-month and 3-month interval. We also tested her recall of the events that she used the written diary to record, but at just 1 month after those events, she had absolutely no recall there. So this suggests to us that using SenseCam has actually helped her consolidate those memories, and that this wasn't achieved by using other means of helping review and rehearse the information. So we're obviously very pleased with these results, and we often get asked quite a lot of questions at this stage about precisely what is going on here. What on earth is it that SenseCam is allowing to happen in the brain that allows this rapid and progressive consolidation of memories? And these are questions that I'll come on to answer in just a moment. But it's important to remember that SenseCam is offering us a very new way to look at memory, and there are therefore simply masses of questions for us to start answering at this stage. So, as I said, they were very, very pleased with the results themselves, and they felt that they'd achieved those 3 goals that I showed just a moment ago. She felt more confident, and they were enjoying being able to share memories with each other again. And importantly for us, she described the experience of watching SenseCam movies as having memories coming flooding back for her. And this is a really good indicator for us that she's actually having that episodic memory recall, rather than just having learnt the SenseCam images themselves. They continue to be very enthusiastic about using SenseCam. They're still very heavily involved in our research, and they obviously think that it's potentially a great memory aid, and it's been very successful for the 2 of them. As I say, we're obviously delighted with these results, and we have a number of publications underway at the moment. So the first is due to appear and has been accepted in the clinical journal. The second of which Carla has copies of actually at the back of the room for anybody that wants to take one. And this is a paper which goes into a bit more detail about the technical side of it, as well as these clinical results, and will be published in the full proceedings of UBICOMP. And there's also a book chapter due to come out. So Emma and I in Cambridge are now very keen to try and replicate these results in a larger group of patients. And our main focus at the moment is looking at the same study, having standardised it a bit more, in a group of patients with Alzheimer's disease. And we're quite excited about collecting this data because obviously this group of patients stand to benefit in really quite a significant way from using this episodic memory rehabilitation aid. As yet we've only got anecdotal results, and if I've got time at the end I'll give you some of those. They're quite nice stories. We're also running the same study in groups of patients with other causes of memory loss of varying ages. So patients with, for example, epilepsy, other brain infections and developmental disorders. Mr. and Mrs. B, as I said, are still very heavily involved in our research, and we are therefore starting with them to try and answer some of the very basic questions about the mechanisms of SenseCam that helps facilitate consolidation of memories. And to begin with, we've decided to focus on these reviewing schedules. So, for example, looking at the retention interval schedules, which refer to the optimum amount of time between the event itself and the initial reviewing of the event, and to optimum spaced rehearsals, so the amount of time between reviews. We showed these results to a number of leading clinicians in the field, and we have been simply overwhelmed with response and requests to participate in collaborations with us on SenseCam projects. And to say that these people are authorities and leaders in their field is really no exaggeration, and we're therefore now in the process of setting up very significant and exciting research alliances with these and many more. And I'd just like to acknowledge a few people. So Professor John Hodges, who is an expert in cognitive impairment following neurological disorders, and Professor Adam Zeman, who is world-renowned for his work on consciousness and relatedly on memory, and the Oliver Zangwill Centre, which is one of the world's leading rehabilitation clinics following brain injury. So I work with Professor Hodges in the memory clinic, and it's through here that most of our patients with Alzheimer's have come. And we're also planning to replicate this same study in a group of patients with mild cognitive impairment. And these are a group of people who are at a very, very high risk of going on to develop neurodegenerative disease. And therefore, much in the same way as we're all recommended to keep our brains healthy by carrying out cognitive exercises such as crosswords, we want to find out whether using SenseCam for these people will actually help ward off impending and severe memory problems. Two of our patients currently enrolled in trials have come via Adam Zeman, and one of his junior doctors is actually interested in looking at the relationship between SenseCam and semantic dementia. One of our main collaborations at the moment is with the Oliver Zangwill Centre, which was set up by Professor Barbara Wilson, who is an authority on brain injury rehabilitation. And I'm not going to say too much about this project here at the moment because it's really quite involved, but suffice to say that we're interested in pursuing SenseCam as a rehabilitative tool for areas other than those just related to memory. So in particular, we want to couple SenseCam with physiological monitors to help assess and treat people with brain injury, and also in the mental health setting more generally. So, for example, we may be able to try and work out what particular events cause distress, as measured, for example, by elevations in heart rate. We see huge amounts of potential here, and not least because we think SenseCam is offering us, for the first time, a very valid way of gaining some kind of objective measurement of something which to date has relied upon its measurement through subjective reporting. This obviously applies to a whole host of psychological skills and abilities, and therefore not only do we think that SenseCam will be a great memory aid, but we also think it will inform our current theory about memory functioning. So, Professor Martin Conway has dedicated much of his career to defining and describing memory, and particularly episodic and autobiographical memory. He's regarded as a world expert in the field, and to say that he's enthusiastic about the prospects of SenseCam is really an understatement. And in his words, he says that SenseCam is potentially the first truly powerful 21st century memory stimulant that could improve general memory functioning in the population at large. So this is really quite a significant statement. And why does our world expert think that memory stimulates, that SenseCam stimulates this consolidation so well? Well, he has two basic hypotheses, and he's conducting research upon the back of both of those at the moment. And the first is that we think that SenseCam images are very similar in nature to the kinds of images stored in episodic memory. So if you just think back to that memory that I asked you to recall at the beginning of this talk, whether it was a wedding, a meeting, whatever it was, you probably find that it shared in common many of these characteristics. So the recollection was probably very visual in nature. It was from your point of view, this way out onto the world. The recollection occurred in the same time order as it did originally, and you didn't have to do anything in order for that memory to form. when you did recall the memory, that occurred in a fraction of the time that the actual event took place. So critically, there is another really important feature of our episodic memory, and that is that we think it corresponds to changes in our goal-oriented behaviour. And what I mean by that, to use Martin Conway's terms, is that memory is motivated. So one of the primary functions of a memory system is to enable us to evaluate where we're at in terms of our life, but also our very smaller day-to-day goals. So every time I embark upon a behaviour that relates to one of those goals or represents completion of one of those goals, that gets marked in memory. So even if this is a very small goal or plan, such as me going up and getting a cup of coffee, I am more likely to remember the beginning bits of that behaviour, so as I get up and go and make the cup of coffee, and the behaviour that represents its completion. So how does all of this relate to SenseCam? Well, it's not difficult to see how all of these points are actually features of SenseCam. And just to talk a little bit more about the goal-oriented behaviour, as most of you will be aware, SenseCam is set to trigger image capture in response to significant changes in environmental settings. So whether these are light, temperature, motion, whatever. So if you just think about that for a second, as I get up to go and make my cup of coffee, what happens is there's a change in my environment. SenseCam detects that change and takes a picture. As I'm carrying out the behaviour itself, I'm in one room, I'm in and out of the cupboards, but my environment isn't changing all that significantly, and therefore fewer images are captured. And we therefore think that it might be the case that the way that SenseCam captures images mimics precisely the way in which our memory filters which of the important images to store. So Professor Conway is therefore now investigating the extent to which SenseCam helps consolidate and retrieve memories, and also to ask some age-old questions, such as how we forget over time and how our memories decline with age. His second hypothesis relates to the brain structures that are involved in memory consolidation. And I just want you to think for a moment about how difficult it is to actually trigger a memory in somebody else. So, for example, if there's somebody that we all know, somebody in common to us all, and I want to remember that person to you, and I have an image in my head of that person, a perfect image, and I go about trying to describe that person to you in order to trigger your recall. So I might say to you, oh, you know, Paul, a really tall guy, dark hair, big glasses, you know, Paul. But that might be any one of a number of people to you, even though I've got this perfect image in my head. When I do manage to trigger that recall, you get that sort of, oh, yes, experience, and all of a sudden all of the cues match up. But it's really difficult to do this for people with memory impairment. And it's important to remember that that's because of a problem of access. So for them, that information is there, but we just can't cue it. It just doesn't get activated in the same way as we can activate our own memories. And therefore, there's no mechanism by which for them to rehearse that information which would guarantee its place in long-term storage. So what we need then for people with memory impairment is something that very well addresses is a very powerful cue into accessing those memories. And what could be more powerful than something that looked pretty much exactly the same as the original image itself? So watching a SenseCam movie for people with memory impairment then it activates the system and therefore allows rehearsal of memories that would otherwise have remained locked away. So we think that the system that is activated by SenseCam is the very same system that is used in the formation of our episodic memories, and that's the hippocampus and the related structures. And Professor Conway is therefore now very interested in using functional neuroimaging techniques to study exactly what is going on in the brain when we watch SenseCam images. Where is our episodic recall and consolidation taking place? And using the same techniques to study the mechanisms of episodic memory in both the normal population and in patients. So again, these represent very new studies in the field and potentially landmark potentially sort of just very, very exciting time for us using SenseCam to investigate memory. So by way of a few final words, we think that the work that we've conducted to date tells us or points to the potential for SenseCam as a new form of rehabilitative aid in memory disorders, but also in the assessment and treatment of other cognitive and emotional disorders. We think that it may inform our current thinking about memory functioning, and it has the potential to act as an inoculation against the effects of memory decline in the normal population. So for those of us whose central processor is feeling just a little bit worn out and run down, maybe the time has come when Microsoft Memory will be available to boost our systems. Just before I finish, I just want to acknowledge Professor Narendra Kapoor and Dr. Emma Berry, who's been chiefly responsible for the work that we've carried out to date. Thank you very much. You can do that.
Anyone else have a one is just on the self-confidence front.
Sure.
You found it all that it scares the person because they realize, oh my word, I don't have any memory of all that.
Yeah, interestingly, one of the things that we're finding, and this is obviously very qualitative at the moment, is that we go through a whole interview process with patients before we set them on SenseCam trials. And patients themselves tend to be very blasé about their memory problems. So it's not so bad. I don't really need this, and I can get by. And it'll be the spouse that says, no, actually, we are in absolute dire straits, and we are desperate for something. So there's almost this sort of denial process going on. And I think they kind of want the SenseCam and see what it can do for them, but they don't want to raise their expectations or have to accept that their memory is so bad that they can't function without it. So there isn't that much fear in that sense, but there's certainly other things going on there, I think.
I really like. I think the research you've done is remarkable. And the question I have is, when you show the patient was able to remember,
Yep. More over time. Yep.
Over time. Do you have a sense if you compare that with a person with good memory?
Right.
Percentage of
So we don't have any formal statistics on that, but we think that she's recalling at approximately the normal rate that you or I would. So the amount of consolidation that takes place there and is retained over time is probably actually a little bit better than you or I would do because she's rehearsing it a little bit more than we would. John?
Yeah, I was wondering, imagine some other folks that this has occurred to. Would this work for a normal person to improve their memory?
Right.
Let's say, theoretically, I have my GREs next year and I want to improve my verbal.
So there's different kinds of memory that we're talking about, and I think generally we are hoping that what we will find is that we're basically stimulating the critical structure, right? So it's like working a muscle, and we hope that by working that muscle, in effect, that we will improve our memory functioning per se. So we would very much like that to be the case. I think that at the moment the focus is obviously on memory of the past, but sure, give it a go and see what happens. Yeah, it's very exciting. Yeah.
I just wondered if you could say something about the Alzheimer's experience that you've had. It seems like the limbic encephalitis may be a specific thing that was
Sure.
slowly suited.
Right. So with the acquired brain injuries and the encephalitis, the difference I didn't mention actually between those patients and those with neurodegenerative disease is that their memory impairments are stable and may improve over time. So this lady that we assessed with limbic encephalitis, she was fairly, her cognitive function in other domains was fairly intact and wasn't about to decline. So for Alzheimer's patients, it's obviously a very, very different story, right? And the reason that we're running the studies in patients with early Alzheimer's is because it's at that stage that we start to see these sort of really significant problems with their episodic memory, but where they're just about coping in all other areas of their lives. So as I say, the medication doesn't work once you get further down the line, and once patients are too impaired to even use the the material itself, then we're going to run into difficulty. But we've had some really nice feedback from patients with Alzheimer's, and we don't, as I say, we don't have any quantitative data at the moment. But the anecdote that I alluded to is of a patient of ours who recently went on holiday to Spain and took the SenseCam with him, and they went on a day trip to Malaga. And they decided they were going to record the whole day using their camera, but that they were going to take the train there and not therefore turn the SenseCam on until they'd actually got into the city. So there's like an hour's worth of train journey or something before they actually turn the camera on. They had it all day. She started testing recall in the same way that I've described. And she found, his wife found that he had absolutely fantastic recall of the day, lots of really vivid images and details of the day, but he kept asking and continues to ask, but how did we get there? So he's consolidated all of that information, but not that bit that he wasn't able to rehearse. We're aware of the time.
Two more, right? A really quick one. And the consolidation is taking the SenseCam images and showing them in that movie, which is just like flick, 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 flick of images. Is that the way it's done?
That's the way it happens. So, the idea is that cues the actual event itself. So you have a re-experience basically of that event in your brain, and it's that rehearsal of the event that consolidates the information.
Super quick question. Have you thought about other ways in which you can augment that viewing to make it really easy for a person as an individual who might have Alzheimer's and doesn't have any support or has very little support to make that even more compelling, authoring and that sort of thing? Yeah,
sure. So it's a really good question, and the software that we've been using at the moment has been designed for patients, so it's a very, very simple interface that we have at the moment. But of course we're sort of obviously thinking about how we might add other bits of text or whatever to help that process. So there's a bit of there's a program at the moment that allows you to gain face recognition. So you store people's faces, photographs of faces, and you tag that with the label. So whenever they would appear within the movie, a tag would come up saying this is so and so. So there's all sorts of things that we could think about. But yeah, it's a good question. Okay. Taking it this time. Thank you.